I sat at my son's birthday table, the candles still flickering, as my daughter-in-law's knife glided through the cake. Frosted plates moved around me like clockwork, except mine. She smiled, sweet as poison. "You'd just catch diabetes anyway." The room laughed softly, then looked away. I didn't. I just folded my napkin, sipped my tea, and decided that the next thing I'd slice would be her name, out of my will. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The clink of polished forks and soft jazz hummed through the sleek angles of the Greystone house. White oak floors, gallery white walls, and a kitchen so pristine it looked staged. Matt's birthday dinner was winding down, laughter having dipped into the low murmur of half-empty wine glasses and conversational leftovers. Elaine sat at the far end of the dining table, her back straight, ankles crossed under the mahogany. Her floral cardigan looked out of place against the minimalist, monochrome decor. No one asked her about it. No one asked her much of anything. Tessa breezed in from the kitchen, heels clicking like punctuation. She carried a dessert tray with the confidence of a magician about to reveal her final act, a 3-tier bakery cake, glistening under the pendant lights, frosted in slate blue and white, ringed with sugar-dusted blackberries. It looked like something out of a magazine. The guests, mostly Matt's co-workers and CrossFit couple friends, leaned in with murmurs of appreciation. "Custom made," Tessa announced, setting it down in the center like a holy offering. Just enough for guests. Elaine caught the flicker in Tessa's eyes. It wasn't smugness, it was something more precise, targeted. Matt, already a few drinks in, gave a woozy chuckle. "You're spoiling us, babe," Tessa grinned. Wouldn't want anyone to go home hungry. Her eyes swept the table, then stopped, sharp, deliberate, on Elaine. She picked up the silver cake knife and began slicing with practiced hands, laying each piece carefully onto porcelain plates rimmed in gold. One by one, she passed them out. 8 guests, 8 plates. When she reached Elaine, she paused. "Oh," Tessa tilted her head, voice sweet as Splenda. "You wouldn't want to trigger your diabetes, right?" The table paused. Someone laughed too loudly, then stopped. A woman with pin-straight hair cleared her throat. A man pretending not to hear poured more wine. Even Matt's smile faltered, a flicker of embarrassment barely masked by his shrug. Elaine's face didn't change. She folded her hands over her napkin. "I don't have diabetes," she said quietly. Tessa blinked, then smirked as if Elaine had told a joke. Still, better safe than sorry. She moved on. The sugar-slick plates clinked around her, the smell of vanilla and almond buttercream filling the air. Elaine sipped her tea. The heat stung her tongue, but she didn't flinch. Her eyes were fixed on a corner of the marble countertop, her expression unreadable. No one looked at her again. The conversation tried to recover. Matt launched into a half-hearted story about a botched hiking trip. Someone asked about flights to Tahoe, but there was a tension under it now, like a violin string wound too tight. Elaine reached for her purse, fingers brushing the zipper, when something shifted. Hannah, Matt's cousin from Asheville, the one with the quiet voice and half-bitten nails, leaned across the table while the others laughed at a joke she didn't hear. Without a word, she slid a folded napkin toward Elaine. There was a sliver of cake inside, no bigger than 2 bites, carefully tucked between the folds like contraband. Elaine looked up. Hannah didn't meet her eyes. She just gave a small nod, then turned back to her untouched wine glass. Elaine stared down at the cake. Her throat tightened, not from grief, not from hunger, but from the sudden awareness that she'd almost forgotten how it felt. To be seen, even a little. She lifted the napkin and took a bite. The sugar hit her tongue, dense, sweet. Something sharp beneath the buttercream. Lemon? She chewed slowly, watching Tessa from across the room, her laughter rising over Matt's shoulder as she refilled a guest glass. Elaine swallowed, then folded the rest of the cake back into the napkin, tucking it into her purse with steady hands. She would not cry, not here. But a thought slid through her mind, cool and clean like a razor across glass. She'll choke on her perfect life eventually, and when she does, I'll be the one handing her the water. Morning came quiet and gray, the kind of sky that looked like wet cotton pulled across the sun. Elaine didn't open the blinds. She moved slowly through the silence of her condo, wrapped in her robe, her bare feet whispering across the hardwood. She bypassed the kitchen. No appetite. Instead, she moved to the hall closet and pulled down the thick burgundy binder with gold-stamped tabs. Estate, legal, healthcare, from the upper shelf. Dust bloomed in the air as she carried it to the dining table. Her hands didn't shake. They hadn't shaken since last night. She opened to the estate tab and began flipping. Everything neat, labeled, precise. The product of 30 years working in contracts and compliance. Elaine didn't miss things. She knew where every detail lived. And yet there it was, on page 13 under the codicil amendment dated 4 years ago. Secondary beneficiary, contingent, Tessa Randall, 25%. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She remembered the conversation with Matt, back when he and Tessa had first gotten serious. She's not just a girlfriend, he'd said. She's building a life with me. He'd talked fast, nervous, as if he were asking for forgiveness in advance. Elaine hadn't pushed back then, because she'd wanted to be the kind of mother who trusted her son, because she'd believed he'd eventually see, but now she saw, clear as glass. She picked up her phone and dialed. 2 rings. Elaine, came the voice, smooth and familiar. Everything all right? Frank, she said, voice calm as a still lake. I need a change. He hesitated. Okay, what kind? I want her out. Fully and permanently. A soft exhale on the line. Tessa? Yes. A pause. You understand that removing her from the secondary slot could create a tension with Matt down the line. If something happens to him before... She will not be tied to my legacy, Elaine interrupted. Not 1 cent. Not a shred of it. Frank's tone shifted, more alert now. We can replace the codicil with a revocable trust structure, stronger, more private. Lets you shape who has what and who never touches it, without probate messes. I'll draft something clean. Conditions? Whatever you want. I've done a few with trigger clauses. If the marriage ends, or if the person fails to meet certain behavioral criteria. Elaine was already writing. Her pen moved like a scalpel. I want moral clauses, financial mismanagement, estrangement, irreconcilable behavior. Anything that gives me a gate to close. Frank chuckled softly. You're giving me déjà vu, you know that? This is just how you handled your father's estate. He earned it, she said. So did she, just not the same way. Understood. Quiet edit. The quieter, the better. They talked details, logistics, timeline. The call ended with a handshake of words and a promise for a couriered draft within the week. Elaine leaned back in her chair. The binder sat open beside her, pages fluttering gently in the breeze from the vent above. Behind her, June padded in wearing sweats, a coffee mug in hand. She paused in the doorway, one eyebrow lifted. Binders out. That's never just for fun. Elaine didn't look up. Making some updates. June walked over, peering down at the estate section. Ah, that kind of update. Elaine nodded once. June pulled out the chair beside her and sat, quiet for a beat. Then she said, voice low but certain, a quiet edit is louder than any scream. Elaine looked over at her, really looked. June wasn't a woman of drama. She didn't raise her voice, didn't slam doors. But when she moved with intent. And she always understood. Elaine closed the binder slowly. I'm not screaming, she said. June smiled into her mug. No, you're building. Elaine stood, walked back to the closet, and slid the binder back into its slot like a finished chapter. She wasn't angry anymore, not like last night. Anger was useful, but it burned out fast. This would burn slow. She closed the closet door, turned, and froze. On the table sat her phone, face up, still unlocked, and Matt's name at the top of the recent calls list. The timestamp read 0003. The call had connected. She hadn't noticed it ring, hadn't touched it. A cold ripple spread through her chest. Her finger hovered over the screen. No voicemail, no text, just silence. But someone had listened, and she had no idea who. The walls of Dr. Levine's office were still the same pale green, faded like hospital scrubs, left too long in the wash. Elaine sat on the edge of the padded exam table, one leg crossed over the other, reading the framed quotes on the wall as if for the first time. Health is the crown on the well person's head that only the ill can see. She'd read that one 20 times over the years. It never landed. She wore lipstick today, not bright, not theatrical, just enough to remind herself that this wasn't about illness. It was about proof. Dr. Levine stepped in, pushing her glasses up with a smile. Elaine, still punctual, I see. Habit, Elaine said, from when people respected time. He chuckled, tapping her chart. All right, full workup like usual? And then some, she said. Blood pressure, weight, reflexes. She rattled off her medications. None. Family history, still unpleasant but unchanged. She answered questions with clinical efficiency, voice flat, eyes ahead. The labs came back by early afternoon. Elaine sat in the same room, same chair, as Levine scrolled through numbers on the monitor. Honestly, he said, leaning back, you're in better shape than most of my 50-year-olds. No signs of prediabetes, no inflammation markers, cholesterol excellent. You're boring me, Elaine. Can you write that down? She asked. He looked at her over the rim of his glasses. Excuse me? I want a signed statement, she said. From you. Clean bill of health, no diabetes, no cognitive concerns, no limitations. A beat. Elaine. His voice softened. Did something happen? No, she said too quickly. Then, quieter. Nothing I want documented. Just the note. He studied her a second longer, then nodded. All right, but if someone's giving you trouble. They'll stop, she said, once the facts are on record. He printed the letter, signed it in blue ink, and slid it across the counter. She folded it once, placed it into the slim leather folio she'd brought just for this, and stood. By late afternoon, Frank had it. Consider this another nail, Elaine told him on the phone, listening to his keyboard clack in the background. No one's going to claim I was confused when I changed the trust. Or weak, or compromised. Frank grunted. Smart. With that on file, anyone challenging capacity down the line will have a hell of a time. Good. She didn't tell him about the phone call. She hadn't told anyone, but she felt it. That shift. That invisible stir in the air, like something had started watching her a little more closely. That night, she poured herself a small glass of wine, opened the healthcare tab in her binder, and removed the worn document naming Matt as her healthcare proxy. It was 15 years old. She remembered the conversation, remembered his nervous nod as he took on the responsibility. He'd only been in his 20s, but he'd sworn he could handle it. That version of him might have meant it. This one was different. She replaced the page with a new one, signed, witnessed, notarized. It named June as proxy. June, who didn't flinch at blood or decisions. June, who didn't perform her loyalty like a play. Elaine slid the document into place and locked the binder shut. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived in her mailbox. No return address, just her name in blocky handwriting. Inside was a grocery store flyer. Wrapped around it, a note. No one listens until something's missing. She turned it over, no signature, no markings. But she recognized the handwriting. Hannah. That night, Elaine stood by her bedroom window, the flyer still clutched in her hand. Below, the streetlight cast sharp shadows across the pavement. A car pulled away from the curb, a beige sedan she didn't recognize. She hadn't told Hannah anything. Not about the trust, not about the binder, not about Matt. But somehow she knew, and if Hannah was watching, someone else might be too. The air smelled like ironwood and fresh ink. Elaine sat at the conference table in Frank's office, her pen gliding in deliberate strokes across the trust paperwork. The stack was thick, no accidental gestures here. Each page had been drafted, reviewed, and redrafted to the exact specifications she'd outlined 2 weeks ago. Across from her, Frank watched without commentary. He knew better than to fill the silence with unnecessary talk. Elaine worked like a surgeon, precise, detached, and entirely certain of what she wanted removed. The fund activates when she turns 18, she said, sliding the final signed page toward him. Frank nodded. With a third-party trustee, just like you asked. And the conditions are tight. No access by relatives. No override. No early withdrawal unless it's for education or medical hardship. He turned the page. Tessa's name doesn't appear anywhere. She wouldn't be able to touch this, even if she came crawling with a power of attorney in each hand. Elaine's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. That's the point. She reached for the next document. The land sale. A forgotten plot in Traverse City, Michigan, left to her by a cousin she barely remembered. Wooded, unused, untouched for 20 years. She'd never bothered to sell it before, but now it had a purpose. She initialed the sale contract without pause. In return, the fund would be seeded with nearly $380,000. Enough to cover 4 years at a private university, room and board, graduate school if she wanted it. June notarized the signature with a neat, practiced hand. She didn't ask questions. She rarely did when it mattered. Elaine gathered the pages back into the leather folder and clicked it shut. She doesn't know, Frank asked. Not yet, Elaine replied. He leaned back, temple tapping the top of his Mont Blanc. You could have waited. I could have done nothing. For a long time, I did. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Frank just nodded and stood. Then this is a fortress. She left with the documents pressed to her side like armor. That night, after dinner, Elaine stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping through the day's mail while the oven hummed behind her. June was finishing dishes, the rhythmic clink of plates her only reply. Elaine opened the drawer next to the fridge, the one where she kept batteries, takeout menus, grocery lists, written on the backs of envelopes. She slid the summary packet inside, not hidden, not flaunted, just placed where it might be found, eventually. The next afternoon, Hannah came over after school. She hovered in the doorway with her usual quiet curiosity, backpack still on, eyes darting like she was checking for exits. Elaine didn't press. She offered tea, gave her space. Hannah sat at the island while Elaine peeled apples with military precision. The girl reached for a pencil and started tracing shapes on a napkin. Circles, triangles, a cartoon fox head. Elaine studied her from the corner of her eye, the nail-bitten fingers, the half-healed cut on her knuckle, the hollow way she smiled when someone looked too hard at her. A long silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Eventually, Hannah asked, "Did you always live here?" Elaine paused. "Since 2007. It's quiet. On purpose." Another beat. Hannah nodded and went back to drawing. After she left, Elaine found the napkin still on the counter. The fox now had wings. 2 days later, the drawer was left slightly open, just enough to notice. Elaine pulled it open and found the trust summary turned sideways. Someone had read it. She looked up and met Hannah's eyes through the kitchen window. The girl stood on the porch, one hand still on the railing, backpack hanging off one shoulder. Her expression wasn't surprised, or even curious. It was something older, like recognition. Elaine stepped toward the door, but Hannah turned and walked down the steps before she could reach it. She didn't run. She didn't wave. She just disappeared around the corner. Elaine closed the door slowly. She should have felt peace. She'd done something right, something secure, something final. But as the house settled around her and the oven clicked off in the background, a chill spread through her limbs. Because Hannah hadn't smiled. And in her eyes, just for a second, Elaine saw fear. The knock came sharp and deliberate. Elaine looked up from her crossword, the sound echoing down the hallway like a challenge. She didn't move at first, just listened. 3 knocks, a pause, then the doorbell. Not June, not Hannah. She opened the door. Tessa stood on the stoop in a silk trench and oversized sunglasses, like a woman arriving late to her own PR scandal. In her hand, a manila envelope, thick and rumpled. In her mouth, a smile stretched tight and false. "Hope I'm not catching you off guard," Tessa said sweetly, stepping inside without being invited. "You rarely are," Elaine replied, closing the door behind her. Tessa walked into the kitchen like she owned the square footage, heels clicking across the tile, pausing only to glance at the table. Her eyes landed on the folder Elaine had left out, one of Frank's. She didn't mention it. Instead, she spun around and dropped the envelope onto the table. It slid open just enough for glossy photo edges to peek out. "Matt's birthday," Tessa said, voice syrup thick. "You remember." Elaine sat down calmly across from her, folding her hands on the table. Wasn't sure you would. That landed. Tessa's jaw twitched, but she didn't rise to the bait. Not yet. You've been busy lately, she said, dragging out the last word like it tasted bitter. Changing proxies, shifting assets, setting up secret funds. She blinked slowly, meddling in family planning. Elaine raised an eyebrow. You mean protecting mine? Tessa laughed once, sharp and flat. Matt and I have been talking about our future, about kids, about building something together. And now, this? Elaine's voice was quiet, steady. It's my money, Tessa, not your forecast. That cracked the varnish. Tessa's smile dropped. You always hated me. I tried not to, Elaine said, but you worked very hard to make it easy. A silence dropped between them, heavy as lead. Tessa crossed her arms. You think this makes you look noble? Cutting me out behind his back. I didn't do it behind his back, Elaine said evenly. I did it in front of his silence. At that, something in Tessa flinched, something reflexive and unguarded. For a half-second, Elaine saw the crack. Matt hadn't defended her, not at the dinner, not since. Elaine leaned forward, her tone colder now. You'll receive nothing. That's final. Tessa's fingers curled around the envelope like a claw. She yanked out the stack of photos, dozens of glossy prints from the birthday night. Matt's arm around her waist, Tessa holding the knife over the cake. Guess mid-laughter. A few caught Elaine, off to the side, unsmiling and mostly cropped out. She fanned them across the table like cards. This is what family looks like, in case you forgot. Elaine looked down at the pictures, then back at Tessa. Funny, she said. I don't see Hannah in any of these. Tessa's lips parted, caught just briefly. Then she scoffed, swiped the photos into a messy stack, and shoved them back into the envelope. You're making a mistake, she said, voice low now. You can still fix this. Elaine stood. So can you, she said. Tessa turned without another word and stalked out, the front door slamming behind her so hard the wall shuddered. Elaine didn't move until the silence fully settled again. Then she picked up her phone and dialed Frank. I want it locked, she said. Frank didn't need clarification. Irrevocable exclusion. Yes. Dated, signed, notarized. Today. Understood. He paused. You okay? Elaine didn't answer right away. I'm more than okay, she said finally. I'm free. The exclusion papers arrived by courier the next morning. Frank's signature sharp in black ink at the bottom. June notarized it with a single nod, sealing the pages with her precise initials. Elaine placed the documents in her safe, flat, permanent, and beyond Tessa's reach. That evening, she took a slow walk down her block. The air had a snap to it, October coming in crisp and unapologetic. She let it bite her skin. She didn't see the car at first. It was parked 2 houses down, tucked just far enough behind the maple tree to be missed at a glance. But it was the same beige sedan, the same silent presence she'd noticed before. And this time, the driver's side window was cracked just enough to see the shadow of someone inside. Watching. Not moving. Elaine's breath slowed. Her spine straightened. She didn't turn back. She didn't stop walking. But the calm inside her began to splinter. Because this wasn't just about Tessa anymore. And whoever was watching wasn't her. The pen glided like it had memory, Elaine's name unfurled in deliberate cursive across the bottom margin of the new estate packet. 12 signatures, 12 witnesses of intention. The conference room at Frank's office was silent except for the faint hum of the HVAC and the quiet click of June's phone camera, steady on its tripod. Recording started, June said, her voice calm, practiced. Date, time, and full visibility of signer. Frank nodded in approval, flipping through the pages one by one. Every protection clause in place. And the new dignity provision you requested is highlighted here. He turned the binder toward Elaine. The paragraph gleamed in the light of the overhead fixture. Sharp, concise, final. Any beneficiary who willfully demeans, manipulates, or disparages the grantor shall be permanently excluded from claim to estate assets. Elaine traced the words lightly with one fingertip. Dignity, she murmured. That's the only currency some people ever try to steal. Frank's eyes softened. This ensures they can't. She looked up at the camera, spine straight, voice clear. I am signing this willingly, with full comprehension. No party has coerced, influenced, or misled me. I understand what I'm doing." Her tone carried no tremor, only resolve, the kind that comes when a decision stops feeling like defense and starts feeling like design. Frank nodded. "Perfect. Now the witnesses." He gestured to June and his assistant, who each added their signatures beside hers. The last click of the pen landed like punctuation. "Congratulations," Frank said, stacking the pages into their final binder. "You've just rewritten your legacy." Elaine offered the faintest smile. "No, I just cleaned it." That evening, she carried the binder home herself, refusing Frank's courier offer. The night was cool, and the walk from the parking lot to her condo was longer than she remembered. But she liked it that way. Her hands needed to feel the weight of what she'd built. Inside, she set the binder on the kitchen island, beside the small iron key that opened her fire safe. The safe sat tucked behind the cedar panel in her bedroom closet. She hadn't opened it in months, but she still remembered the combination: birthdays she no longer celebrated, anniversaries that had stopped mattering. The door released with a sigh. Inside, her old will, the codicil, an envelope of property titles, and 3 loose photo negatives from years ago, Matt as a boy. Standing by the lake with his fishing rod, sunlight hitting his cheek just right. Elaine studied the documents, the handwriting of a woman she no longer was. They felt stale. The ink itself seemed tired, the paper slightly yellowed. She gathered the outdated pages and fed them into the small metal burn box she kept on the balcony. One by one, the edges curled and darkened, then gave in to flame. The smoke lifted, thin and gray, disappearing into the October air. When it was done, she stood over the ashes for a long moment, then returned the empty binder sleeve to the safe. She replaced the iron key in its usual drawer. Everything sealed, everything whole. The next morning, she left early for her volunteer shift at the library. When she returned that afternoon, the air in the condo felt disturbed, not violated, not broken, just moved. The faintest scent of perfume lingered in the hallway, floral, artificial, not hers. Elaine walked straight to her bedroom. The cedar panel in the closet was slightly ajar. Her pulse slowed, not sped up. She pulled it open fully. The safe door stood wide, unlocked, rifled. Inside, the folders were in disarray, half of them gone, the fireproof lining smudged with faint fingerprints. On the floor beneath, one crumpled sheet of white paper, not burned, just folded and dropped. Elaine bent down and picked it up. Her own handwriting stared back at her from the top corner. An older will page, the one that once listed Tessa Randall, 25% contingent. So someone had gone looking for ghosts. Behind her, the hallway floor creaked. She didn't turn around. Instead, she refolded the page neatly, slid it into the waste bin, and said softly, "Some pages spoil over time. I replaced them." A sharp intake of breath answered from the doorway, then retreating footsteps, fast and uneven, down the hall. By the time Elaine reached the living room, the door was already closing. The faint echo of heels on the pavement below faded into the distance. She stood there, motionless, her pulse quiet but steady. Then she walked back to the safe, relocked it, and whispered to the empty room, "Now you know what you lost." Outside, through the window, the beige sedan idled at the curb again, driver's window down. But this time, the figure inside wasn't watching her. They were smiling. The envelope was thick, formal, and deliberately over-addressed. Elaine found it wedged between the gas bill and a postcard from her dentist. A legal cream envelope with block letter printing and an embossed firm name she didn't recognize. She slid it open with her letter knife, not rushing. Inside, a printed letter on heavy bond paper, stamped urgent in red, and signed by Rachel Kim, J.D., Park Marwood Family Law Group. The first paragraph was pleasantries. "Hope this letter finds you well." But the body was unmistakable in tone. "My client, Tessa Randall, as the long-term partner of your son, Matthew Ashford, requests immediate disclosure of all active estate instruments under family rights considerations and anticipatory inheritance protections." Elaine folded the letter back in perfect thirds and placed it on the table without a word. She didn't need to read it twice. By the time she reached Frank's office that afternoon, he already had a copy. She filed under pseudo-spousal consideration, he asked, brow raised. That's bold. She's not legally anything, Elaine said flatly. Not my daughter, not his wife. Just a +1 who brought her own pen. Frank sat back, flipping the letter once. They're trying to bait you into a disclosure mistake. If you give her a copy of the will now, even informally, it can be used to argue implied beneficiary standing. She's not getting a sentence. Good. He slid an official reply draft across the table, short, cool, and firm. Ms. Randall is not a named party to any instrument of inheritance or trust. As such, no documents will be released. All current filings are secured and legally compliant. Elaine read it slowly, then nodded. Send it. The escalation came in 48 hours. Tessa's next move was louder. She filed a preliminary inquiry with the county clerk's office, claiming concern over potential undue influence and sudden, uncharacteristic shifts in estate control and health proxy assignments. The language was veiled, but the subtext screamed. She's coming for your competency, Frank said grimly, reading the digital submission aloud over the phone, implying coercion, manipulation. June, maybe? Me? Possibly. She's casting a net. Elaine was silent on the other end of the line. Then, I want the evaluation. Official. Sealed. Frank paused. You sure? That's a level most people don't preemptively walk into. She's expecting me to be afraid of that step, Elaine said. Let her be disappointed. Within 3 days, Dr. Annette Rhodes, a court-certified geriatric psychologist, had run a full-capacity exam on Elaine. Memory recall, executive reasoning, emotional regulation, abstract logic, all filmed, all documented. When the session ended, Dr. Rhodes looked at her over the rim of her glasses and said, I wish more people protected their minds like you've protected your estate. The report came back 48 hours later. No cognitive impairment, fully competent, fit for independent legal decision-making. Evaluation sealed, notarized, and witnessed. Elaine filed the folder into the fire safe herself. This time, she checked the lock twice. Meanwhile, June had started her own silent rebellion. She bought a narrow spiral notebook and kept it in the drawer next to the phone. Every time Tessa called and left a voicemail laced with insult. It's pathetic she's hiding behind legalese. Or, she can't keep playing queen of her condo forever. June logged it. Date, time, witness, paraphrase, and tone. She added a small star next to the ones where Matt's voice joined in the background. Elaine never asked her to do it. She didn't need to. The confrontation with Matt came on a Thursday, when he stopped by to clear the air. Elaine had just returned from the grocery store. He caught her by the driveway, standing awkwardly with his keys still in hand. I didn't authorize that letter, he said quickly. That was Tessa's lawyer. Elaine nodded, setting the grocery bags down carefully. I assumed. But you're turning this into war, he said. Why? Elaine looked at him, expression unreadable. If you think this is war, you've never seen me fight. Matt shifted, the old boyish charm trying to surface, but it didn't stick. I'm just saying, there has to be a middle ground. There was, she said. You stood in it, and said nothing. His mouth opened, closed. Elaine picked up her groceries and turned toward the door. You should go, she said, before you end up choosing a side by accident. She didn't slam the door behind her. She didn't need to. That night, a new voicemail arrived. It wasn't Tessa's voice. It wasn't Matt's. Just breathing. Long, slow, steady. And then a click. It dropped at 6:03 p.m. on a Wednesday. Tessa posted it without a caption, just a black and white photo of Matt at age 7, sitting on Elaine's lap, his shoelaces untied, her hand on his knee. The kind of image meant to soften, to reframe the battlefield as a family album. But it was the text beneath that cut through the quiet. My partner's mother, once kind, now cold, has removed me from everything without warning. No conversation, no fairness. Just signatures and silence. I loved her, but I guess legacy matters more than love to some. It wasn't tagged. It didn't need to be. By 7:30, the post had over 300 reactions. Mutual friends, church ladies, neighbors with nothing better to do. The ones who liked the idea of Matt and Tessa more than they knew either one of them. By 8:12, the comment section had turned into a skirmish line. "You're kidding. Elaine always adored you. What happened?" "Blood doesn't mean loyalty. People change when wills get involved. Sad to see. You're owed nothing unless there's a ring. Legally, she's not your mom. You're not entitled. Sit down." Elaine read it all in silence, the screen glow lighting her glasses. She scrolled methodically, never flinching, never pausing. She saved every screenshot, every timestamp. She knew better than to argue in the open. She knew that memory faded, but metadata never did. June walked in around 9, coat slung over one arm, phone already buzzing in her pocket. "You seen it?" she asked, not even needing to specify. Elaine nodded, scrolling again. "It's emotional theater." Conveniently cropped, June set her coat on the hook, then leaned against the doorway. Half her post was dog whistles for victimhood, but you should see the comment I left. Elaine glanced up. June smirked and held up her phone. The comment thread glowed bright. "Be careful, she raised the record-keeping queen." Elaine actually laughed. Sharp, brief, real. "She's not expecting me to be strategic." "No," June agreed. "She's expecting you to be tired." But not everyone was convinced by Tessa's curated martyrdom. At 10:42 p.m., the tone shifted. A single comment appeared. Unliked, unshared, but loaded. "You said she was senile, but she just filed a signed mental evaluation last week." The name beneath it was Hannah Randall. And 5 minutes later, another one followed. "You said she forgot my birthday. She didn't. You threw out the card." Elaine's breath caught. She clicked Hannah's name and found a single public post. Vague, raw, but real. Sometimes the people who say they're protecting you are the ones holding the knife. The next morning, Frank called before Elaine had even boiled the kettle. "She's trying to set narrative before the court date," he said, but her language crossed the line. "I know. I filed a slander exposure notice. Doesn't accuse, it just places the court on notice that reputational risk is being weaponized online." Elaine poured her tea. "Smart. Screenshots? Tagged, sorted, filed." "Of course." He hesitated. "You okay?" Elaine looked out the window at the street. Quiet now. No beige sedan, no watcher. But something else had shifted. For the first time, Elaine felt it. She wasn't just defending herself. She was winning. "I'm better than okay," she said. "She's finally blinking." Later that afternoon, while folding laundry, Elaine noticed something odd. A bundle of envelopes tucked deep in the bottom of the linen drawer. Handwritten return addresses, postage never marked. She sat on the edge of the bed, peeling one open. Inside, a birthday card for Hannah. A gift card still taped inside. Another envelope, handwritten apology from Elaine, dated a year ago. All unsent. She didn't remember placing them there, but someone did. Someone had taken her voice and buried it in cotton and lavender sachets. Her hands tightened on the paper. She stood slowly and walked back to her desk. She opened a fresh folder and labeled it in clean, sharp marker. Suppressed correspondence. Pending evidence. The folder was thick before sunset. That night, a new comment appeared under Tessa's post. It was just an emoji. No name, no likes, no reply. Elaine stared at it for a long time, because it hadn't come from a friend, or a troll, or even Tessa. It came from a private account made that same day. By Friday, Tessa's post had done something she hadn't intended. It cracked her brand. The boutique skincare line she'd spent 4 years cultivating, part organic hustle, part influencer gloss, started bleeding endorsements. A small chain in Charlottesville paused their reordering, pending clarification. Her clean beauty meets mindful motherhood tagline began circulating on Reddit threads with screenshots attached. Manipulating grief for clicks now. Imagine dragging someone over money that isn't yours. Elaine didn't gloat. She watched. She archived. She never once hit like. That morning, Frank called her with a tone that carried the weight of both legalese and victory. "I've added the clause you requested," he said. Standard language, but ironclad. Elaine, seated at her kitchen table, ran a fingertip over the manila file he'd couriered. Addendum B. posthumous remarriage clause. No assets, partial or residual, may be transferred or reassigned to any party via spousal claim if said party has been previously excluded as a beneficiary. This includes remarriage of heirs to excluded individuals post-grantor death. Elaine exhaled through her nose. Frank's voice dropped, amused. You just outmaneuvered a manipulator in heels. She thought legacy only mattered when someone was watching. And now she's learning legacies come with footnotes. Elaine signed the page. She didn't hesitate. That evening, Matt arrived unannounced. No knock. Just a soft jingle of keys, and then the door creaking open. He stepped inside like a man entering a church he hadn't visited since childhood. Unsure if he still believed in it, but desperate enough to try. Elaine was sitting in the den, a blanket over her knees, a book unread in her lap. I used to think I understood you, Matt said, standing just shy of the threshold. Elaine didn't look up. And now? I'm not sure anymore. She set the book down gently. Then it's probably the first honest thing you've said in months. Matt shifted his weight. She's been through hell, too. Elaine gave a faint shrug. Hell doesn't justify arson. She's not entirely wrong. No, Elaine agreed. She's just consistently entitled. Matt's face crumpled, some final scaffolding giving way. I didn't expect you to go this far. You mean protect myself? Elaine asked. Or protect what your silence gave away? He sat on the arm of the couch across from her, hands clasped like a prayer. Do I still get anything? Elaine met his eyes squarely. You get your portion. She never will. The words landed like a verdict. Matt nodded, slow and stunned, as if realizing the gravity of what had been lost. Not money, not property, but proximity. That final place at the center of her trust, emotional, legal, moral, was no longer his to step into without dragging someone else behind him. He left without asking for tea. Elaine didn't offer. Later that night, Hannah stayed over. They sat on the porch swing, the chill in the October air softened by wool blankets, and shared silence. A bowl of popcorn rested between them, nearly untouched. The porch light flickered once, then, softly, Do you regret anything? Elaine turned toward her granddaughter. Hannah's face wasn't defiant, wasn't even searching. It was something gentler, a girl wanting to know if strength always came with sacrifice. Elaine looked out into the dark. I regret waiting so long to say no. She felt Hannah's hand slip into hers. I don't regret what came after, Elaine added. At 11:13 p.m., Elaine's phone buzzed. A single email. Subject line, Archive inquiry, photo metadata discrepancy from unknown. She opened it. Inside, a zip file link, a single line of text, and no signature. You didn't see everything at that birthday party. Elaine stared at the line of text one more time. You didn't see everything at that birthday party. She didn't open the zip file. Not yet. Instead, she forwarded the email to Frank with a single sentence typed beneath it. Whoever this is, they're digging in the right direction. Within the hour, Frank responded. Traced the account to an IP owned by Melissa Jennings' assistant. She interned with us 2 years ago. She was in Tessa's social circle. I'll handle it. The cease and desist was drafted, reviewed, and delivered by noon. Clean, cold, final. By dusk, the email account had been deleted. The threat had curled in on itself like a salted slug. But Elaine didn't delete the message. She printed it, filed it in the back of her unknown communications folder. Some things weren't threats. Some were breadcrumbs. That evening, Elaine sat at her desk beneath the soft brass light of her reading lamp and began to write a different kind of letter. This one with pen and paper. Her hands moved slowly, not from hesitation, but from weight. The weight of legacy. The letter was addressed to Hannah. To be opened when you're ready, she wrote in the top corner. She wrote with no flair, no dramatics, just the plain truth. About silence, about boundaries, about how hard it is to build a life you're proud of when you're raised to prioritize keeping peace over keeping dignity. She explained why she changed the documents, why she stopped waiting to be asked before she acted, why she stopped protecting people who only showed up for appearances. She didn't call it a warning. She called it a blueprint. When she finished, she sealed it in thick linen paper and slid it into the side pocket of her safe. Right beside the notarized healthcare proxy, and the capacity evaluation. The next morning, she called Frank and asked to add a final provision to the will. An ethics clause, she said simply. Frank didn't ask for clarification. He had learned by now that Elaine never requested anything she hadn't already mentally signed. Later that day, the language arrived in her inbox. In the event any named beneficiary is found to have contributed to emotional, reputational, or psychological harm to the grantor or another beneficiary, said individual's inheritance shall be reduced or revoked at the sole discretion of the trustee. Elaine smiled as she clicked approve. That weekend, June began sorting through old photo boxes. She labeled them with years and themes: Lake Summers, first apartments, Hannah's Halloween costumes, Matt before college. At one point, she held up a picture of Elaine on a front porch in 1994, holding a garden trowel and wearing a sweatshirt 3 sizes too big. You want this in the legacy album? Elaine looked over her reading glasses. Only if you crop out the dying fern, June snorted. Absolutely not. That fern is part of the emotional arc. They laughed, longer than expected. The kind of laugh that wrings tension out of air like a sponge. By Sunday afternoon, Elaine walked into her home office with an envelope in hand. She opened the donation portal for the National Diabetes Foundation, typed in her card number, and filled the "in honor of" line with 3 words: Tessa's generous concern. She clicked submit without a blink, then closed the laptop like she'd finished a very small war. Later that night, she returned to the zip file. She opened it. Inside were 4 photos, pulled from the metadata cache of Matt's birthday party. 3 were familiar, guests milling about, cake crumbs, Matt's hollow smile. But the fourth was a candid, blurry, zoomed, off-center. Elaine sitting alone, arms folded. Tessa in the foreground, just beyond the cake table, and next to Tessa, Melissa Jennings, smiling, holding a phone, pointed at Elaine. The morning air was cool enough to bite. Elaine wrapped a scarf twice around her neck and stepped out into it anyway, hands tucked deep into her coat pockets, the sealed envelope tucked tight beneath her arm like a final draft. She took the long way, down Hickory Lane, past the pond where geese had long since scattered south, and onto the quiet walking trail that curved around the park. Leaves rustled like slow applause under her boots, the kind of dry crunch that reminded her the year was winding down whether anyone was ready or not. She didn't bring her phone. She didn't want to hear it ring. The bench she always liked, second from the dogwood, just near the trail's first bend, was still there, clean and unoccupied. She sat slowly, exhaling into the open sky like the trees were witnesses. The ethics clause was already signed, sealed in a heavy envelope with Frank's name typed clean across the front. She would mail it herself. No couriers today, just her hands, her timing. A twig snapped nearby. She looked up to see Riley, the neighbor boy, standing at the edge of the path, hair sticking out from under a backward baseball cap, clutching a bottle of water like it weighed more than it did. "Hi, Ms. Ashford," he said, shy but not unsure. "You looked kinda thirsty." Elaine blinked, surprised, then smiled. "Thank you," she said, accepting the bottle. "I am, actually." He nodded, like it confirmed something about the world, then took off back toward his house with a small wave. She watched him go until he vanished around the bend. The bottle was cool in her hand. She didn't open it, not yet. By mid-afternoon, the envelope was in the outgoing mail slot at the post office, stamped, barcoded, and in motion. Elaine stood outside the building for a moment, eyes closed. Not relieved, not anxious, just present. That night, the house was quiet in the way only well-lived homes can be. Rooms breathing, wood settling, appliances humming like they'd made peace with their purpose. June peeked in around 7:45, carrying a small bag of groceries and a loaf of rosemary bread. "I figured you'd forget to eat," she said gently, setting the items down on the counter. Elaine leaned against the frame of the doorway, arms folded. "I'm just a little tired." June studied her face. Nothing worn, nothing broken. Just a softness that hadn't been there before, like something had unhooked inside her. "You've earned tired," June said finally. They shared a quiet nod. No need for more. Before bed, Elaine walked into the sitting room and placed the sealed letter for Hannah, to be opened when you're ready. On the silver tray next to the antique teapot and her mother's ceramic sugar bowl. She stepped back, adjusted the angle slightly. It looked right there, not hidden, not centered, just waiting. The clock in the hallway ticked past 10. Elaine poured a glass of water, lit one candle, and sat in the reading chair without opening a book. Outside, wind shook the branches gently, and a soft drizzle began tapping against the windows. She didn't check the locks. She didn't check her phone. She just listened. To the stillness, to the record she had rewritten in silence, to the life she had taken back, clause by clause, word by word, insult by insult. It didn't make her a martyr. It made her a map. And in the morning, someone would follow it. At 11:03 p.m., a motion light flickered on outside. A figure moved past the hydrangeas, slow, deliberate, familiar. A woman. Umbrella lowered, eyes sharp. She didn't ring the bell, just stood there, watching the house like she owned something inside it. Elaine didn't move from her chair, didn't rise, didn't blink. She took one sip of water and whispered just once, like a line in a closing chapter. "You're too late." The rain had stopped, but the sky still carried the color of morning, pewter and pearl, shifting like smoke. The church was fuller than anyone expected. Every pew lined with faces Elaine hadn't seen in years. Former colleagues from the hospital, old PTA members, neighbors who still left their porch lights on out of habit. Even the hospice director came. Though Elaine had never needed hospice, the air inside smelled faintly of lilies and old hymnals. A slideshow flickered quietly on the projection screen. Elaine in her lab coat, Elaine in her garden, Elaine standing by that same front porch with the dying fern. June had refused to crop it out. She'd want it honest, June told the volunteer who ran the display. Near the front, Hannah sat beside June, hands folded, expression unreadable. She'd worn a navy dress with a collar, something old-fashioned, something deliberate. Matt was 2 rows behind them, alone. Shoulders slumped, face hollow. He hadn't shaved. At exactly 11:15, the double doors at the back opened. Tessa slipped in, umbrella still dripping, heels clicking too loudly against the marble floor. She wore black, but not humility. The room noticed. She moved down the aisle as if it were a runway, eyes darting from face to face, gauging which ones might still believe her version of events. None met her gaze. June didn't turn. Hannah didn't blink. Tessa took a seat in the far back corner, just close enough to be seen but far enough to avoid accusation. The organ began, a hymn Elaine had chosen herself. "Be still, my soul." When it came time for the eulogies, the microphone squealed once, then settled. June spoke first, steady, pragmatic, the way she'd always been. She didn't teach with words, she said, voice clear. She taught by doing. Every clause in her will, every boundary she drew, was an act of faith. In truth, in self-respect, in the belief that kindness without clarity is cruelty wearing perfume. A murmur of quiet agreement swept the room. Then Hannah rose. Her palms shook at first, the paper trembling in her hands, but her voice found its center halfway through the first line. "My grandmother taught through action," she began. Sometimes that meant letting go before people said thank you. Sometimes that meant silence when everyone wanted spectacle. She looked out over the crowd, her gaze landing briefly, unflinching, on Tessa. "She didn't leave me advice. She left me a letter. I haven't read it yet, but I already know what it says." A pause. That love without accountability isn't love at all. When she sat, June slipped her hand into Hannah's. Tessa didn't move. The will reading took place 2 days later in Frank's office. The blinds were drawn, the table wide enough to feel like a border. Frank read in his usual rhythm, formal, detached, but with a trace of respect that softened every edge. Pursuant to the final revision and supplemental clauses filed under Ashford Trust, dated October 14th, he said, flipping a page, "The grantor hereby designates allocations as follows." Matt listened, eyes lowered, nodding occasionally like a man taking medicine he knew he needed. To Hannah Randall, an education trust and property rights in perpetuity for the residents on Greystone Avenue. A pause. To Matthew Ashford, the remainder of residual assets as listed, held in trust under standard conditions. He turned the next page. And finally, the room shifted, collective breath holding. To Tessa Randall, no inheritance, interest, or residual claim of any kind is granted or implied. The grantor directs that her exclusion is explicit, irrevocable, and permanent. The words hit like iron against stone. Tessa's jaw tightened. She named me. Frank didn't look up. She did. I could contest that. You could, Frank interrupted. But the dignity provision in competency filings would make it a very short case. Silence fell heavy. Matt didn't defend her this time. He just whispered, let it go, and pressed a hand over his eyes. Tessa rose. The scrape of her chair echoed sharp and final. She left without a word. When the door closed behind her, June reached into her tote and pulled out a small sealed envelope. She handed it to Hannah. It was heavier than it looked. To be opened when you're ready, June said softly. She made sure it would find you. Hannah turned it over in her hands, thumb tracing the raised ink of her name. She didn't open it, not yet. But she looked toward the window, where sunlight was breaking through a thin sheet of rain cloud. And for a moment, the reflection in the glass, tilted just right, caught something beyond the room. A woman in a long coat, standing outside, watching, not haunting, not gone, just making sure the story ended the way it was supposed to. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Hannah sat on her grandmother's couch, the same floral one that creaked when you leaned too far to the left, and stared at her name written in that familiar looping hand. To be opened when you're ready. She wasn't, but she opened it anyway. The first page was plain, unlined stationery. Elaine's handwriting filled it from top to bottom in neat, deliberate strokes, the kind that came from someone who never crossed out a word she didn't mean. Hannah, if you're reading this, it means the noise has quieted and the truth no longer needs a courtroom to exist. I left you words because I couldn't leave you confusion. I've spent my whole life being polite in rooms where I should have been honest. That ends with you. You deserve to know how this began. It started at a birthday table, under bright lights and forced laughter. Tessa carried a cake like a trophy, and I watched her slice it into perfect, even pieces, each one smaller than her ego, but just large enough to feed her audience. When she came to me, she smiled and skipped my plate. Wouldn't want to trigger your diabetes, she said. You were there, Hannah. You didn't laugh. That mattered more than you'll ever understand. Because what we let slide, we let grow. That night, I realized silence was a seed, and I had watered far too many in my lifetime. So I started pruning. I rewrote the will, removed her name, fortified every clause until kindness couldn't be mistaken for permission. I added protections, not out of anger, but to build something clean for you to inherit. Not wealth, not property, integrity. You will face people who will tell you that compassion means tolerance. It doesn't. Compassion without boundaries is a slow kind of self-erasure. Don't learn that the way I did. Hannah wiped a tear with the back of her hand. The pages rustled softly as she turned to the second sheet. When I left you the jewelry box, I wasn't leaving you heirlooms. I was leaving reminders. The pearl earrings, those are for when you need to speak in a room full of arrogance and still look composed. The garnet ring, wear it when you sign something that changes your life. And the silver bracelet with the clasp that always sticks? That one's a lesson. Some things are hard to open, but still worth wearing. They're not valuable, but they're true. I didn't build a perfect life, Hannah. I built a record. Every mistake, every correction, every line redrawn. Those are the entries that matter. And if anyone ever tries to tell you that family means forgiveness without accountability, remember this. Family also means history. And history demands accuracy. I don't need you to defend me. I just need you to keep your record straight. Hannah's tears came faster now, slipping down her jaw, quiet but relentless. She pressed a hand to her mouth as she read the final paragraph. You've seen enough to know the difference between noise and truth. You've seen how easily cruelty can hide behind charm. You noticed when I was quiet that night. You noticed when no one else did. That's all I ever wanted. For someone to notice. Keep noticing, even when it costs you something, especially then. And when you speak, do it with precision, do it with purpose. You'll never need permission to speak with kindness. Elaine. The room went still. Even the old clock on the mantel seemed to pause between ticks. Hannah folded the letter back into its envelope, fingers trembling. June entered quietly, stopping in the doorway. You read it? Hannah nodded, unable to form words. June's eyes softened. Then you understand her now. Hannah looked toward the window, where rain pressed gentle patterns against the glass. Outside, the garden glistened, the hydrangeas heavy with water, their stems bent but unbroken. She whispered, almost to herself. She noticed everything. On the side table, the jewelry box sat open. Inside, the silver bracelet caught the light, the tiny clasp glinting like an eye half open. The sound of rain deepened, and from somewhere beyond the house, distant, steady, a car engine turned over, then idled. Waiting, Judge Benson's courtroom smelled faintly of old wood polish and worn carpet. Government buildings always did. The ceilings were too high, the clocks ticked too loudly, and the tension, as always, settled in the spaces between breaths. Tessa sat at the plaintiff's table in a steel gray suit, 2 shades lighter than her rage. She didn't glance at Matt beside her. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks, collar wrinkled, gaze unfixed. Frank sat coolly across the aisle, binder open, glasses resting low on his nose, like he'd seen this show too many times to be moved by the script. Judge Benson entered without fanfare, robes rustling, expression unreadable. This is docket 34217. Petition to contest the last will and testament of Elaine Ashford, deceased. Filed by Tessa Randall. Will begin. The opening arguments were dry, predictable. Tessa's lawyer leaned hard on narrative. Long-term partner, emotional bonds, implied promises. She used the phrase deeply destabilizing betrayal, like it was a legal term. Judge Benson blinked once, made a note. Then it was Frank's turn. He stood slowly, turned to the judge, not the gallery, and laid down the folder. Your Honor, the defense submits the following: 2 capacity evaluations by licensed specialists, dated and notarized. 3 video-recorded estate planning sessions with visible witnesses present, and a sworn affidavit by the notary present at the final signing, affirming that no coercion or unusual influence was observed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply turned over the pages, one at a time, like flipping switches in a circuit board. Furthermore, we submit audio logs, journal entries, and phone records indicating deliberate tampering with the grantor's communication with family, specifically the concealment of mailed birthday correspondence intended for Hannah Randall. At that, Tessa's jaw clenched. The room shifted, and Frank, still calm, closed the folder and said, "We rest." The verdict came swiftly. Judge Benson didn't even look up from her notes as she spoke. This court finds no evidence of undue influence or diminished capacity. The will stands as filed and witnessed. Contestation dismissed. She paused, just long enough to make the next line land like a stone dropped in still water. Petitioner is ordered to cover court costs and administrative delay fees. Final disbursements to proceed without restriction. The gavel came down. Tessa stood too fast. Her chair toppled. She didn't bother to pick it up. Matt followed her out of the courtroom, but he didn't touch her, not once. Frank waited until the room cleared before collecting his papers. He looked to June, sitting quietly in the second row, and gave a small nod. It was done. The probate filings went through that same week. Everything Elaine had fought to protect moved swiftly into place, because she had prepped it with the precision of someone who didn't believe in just in case. The Greystone house transferred to Hannah's name. The education trust was formally funded. The ethics clause sat, untouched but sharp, like a blade in a velvet sheath. No appeals were filed. Tessa had run out of stories. 2 weeks later, the cemetery was quiet, save for the faint buzz of distant highway traffic and the whisper of wind through trees too old to be bothered by grief. Hannah knelt beside Elaine's grave. No fanfare, no crowd, just her. She carried a simple white bakery box. She opened it gently. Inside, a lemon layer cake. Small, careful, homemade. one slice missing. She set it down beside the polished stone. No flowers, no card, just the cake, just the silence. She sat back on her heels and looked up at the gray-blue sky. "You would have hated the frosting," she said softly. "But you would have loved the point." She pulled the silver bracelet tighter around her wrist, and in the distance, the wind shifted slightly, brushing the grass flat in one long sweep, like someone smoothing a tablecloth before dinner. At the edge of the cemetery, a car idled for a beat too long before driving away. It started with a single column. 3 weeks after the probate ruling, Elaine's story appeared in a regional elder care newsletter, tucked quietly between an article on mobility aids and a guide to fall-proofing your bathroom. But readers stopped. They paused on the headline. "Boundaries are not bitterness, one woman's last will and testament." The piece was short, measured, credible. It chronicled Elaine's estate decisions, her mental clarity, her final ethics clause, without names or gossip, just facts, and one quote, set apart in bold, from the sealed will she'd filed herself. "Let it be known this document is not a weapon. It is a record of values I was once too polite to enforce out loud." The piece went modestly viral, circulating in estate planning forums, elder rights circles, even on TikTok, where a law student stitched the quote into a 10-second soundbite that reached 140,000 views in a weekend. No one mentioned Tessa. They didn't need to. Everyone understood who the story was about. The scholarship came next. Hannah filed the paperwork on a Thursday morning between her community college classes, naming it the Elaine Ashford Memorial Fund for Women Reclaiming Education Later in Life. She didn't tell anyone at first, just did it, quietly, thoroughly, like her grandmother would have. The application asked for a mission statement. She typed, "For women who stayed silent too long and found their voice just in time." The fund was fully operational by spring. June, in her usual practical way, skipped the speeches and went straight to the soil. She convinced the city council to approve a small, unused plot behind the library for a community garden. Volunteers came out on Saturdays, raking, digging, hauling compost. No plaque, no photo op. But at the far corner, behind the row of rosemary and zinnias, June quietly buried a sealed envelope in a mason jar, Elaine's original grocery list from the week before she signed her final will. Milk, lemons, unsalted butter, sharp ink, even margins. Tessa's brand didn't survive the winter. Too many screenshots, too few defenders. Her final post, an attempt to clarify the situation, landed flat, full of over-explanation and soft gaslighting. The comments turned. "Why are you still talking? That woman's will wasn't bitter, it was beautiful. You lost. Move on." She disabled replies, shut down the page. By spring, the skincare line folded quietly. No farewell, no apology, just silence. Matt didn't call Hannah right away. He showed up instead, 3 months later at the edge of the garden behind the library, hands in his pockets, sleeves pushed up like he was pretending not to be nervous. She didn't make it easy. She made it real. Conversations took place over benches and potting soil, and old memories that stung like vinegar in the sun. But he listened. He asked. He stayed. And slowly, without making a show of it, a father started becoming something close to a man again. The house on Greystone never went up for sale. Hannah lived there now, still finishing her degree, still folding towels the way Elaine had taught her, still baking cakes that never quite came out as sharp around the edges. She liked it that way. The kitchen felt like a library now, each drawer a memory, each creak in the floorboard a footnote. One afternoon, while organizing a drawer of old clippings, she found a folded napkin tucked beneath the cutlery tray. 2 bites of lemon cake had once lived inside it. She didn't cry. She smiled. Elaine's dignity didn't live on in monuments. It echoed, in silence, in flour, in notarized pages, in Hannah's voice. It lived in the echo of boundaries set so firmly that even in death, they held. It lived in a line, bolded and framed at the back of Frank's office now. His new assistants often stopped to read it, unsure whether it was satire or scripture. "On my son's birthday, my daughter-in-law didn't offer me cake and smirked, 'You'd just catch diabetes anyway.' I said nothing, but my will said everything she needed to hear.